So this is the Caveworks Rivet indoor bike frame, and indoor bike frames are basically the next natural evolution when it comes to indoor cycling, because many of us want a permanent indoor riding setup without necessarily having to mount and remount our real bikes every time we want to ride inside or outside for that matter. And for something permanent, we have options like the full-on smart bike, where you can go ahead and purchase a used road bike or possibly even repurpose an old road bike to have something permanent. But with indoor bike frames, these provide that permanent solution, but they're also purpose-built with indoor cycling in mind. And there's definitely reasons why you may want one of those options versus another, and we'll talk about those reasons in this video, but the dedicated indoor bike frame concept is definitely here to stay. And it was probably popularized by the Zwift Ride that came out a couple years ago, which provides a turnkey solution if you're riding on Zwift. And then Elite also just came out with their square bike frame, which offers something similar, but also a little bit different. And then there's this, the Caveworks Rivet. And I think all of those can be a good solution for a permanent indoor riding setup, but in terms of which one to choose, it's really going to come down to your particular needs, where some of those do some things really well, where others may do them better. Now, you may have already seen the first video I did on the Caveworks Rivet last year, but that was on a prototype model which wasn't 100% finalized, including the color, by the way. But this is the full production model right here. I think serial number like 30 or something like that. And based on the comments and feedback from my original video, they did change the color to black. But other than just the color change, I want to do a follow-up video with the final product that's actually shipping to customers, just to get my longer term ride experience. And I've been putting a lot of miles in this thing, like consistent 2+ hour rides, because it's been a pretty long winter in here in Colorado. So I've definitely had a lot of saddle time in this thing, and can even speak to how well it's held up to sweat. So there's 3 different versions of the Rivet that you can get. So there's a frame only option, and this is going to be good if you have spare parts laying around that you can toss on your frame, or if you want to build your frame up with just the exact parts that you'd like. And then there's also a single speed option, and this is the one that I've been primarily riding, and this will work really well with Zwift virtual shifting, but it'll also work really well with any erg mode based workout platform like, let's say, Trainer Road. And then finally, they also have a fully geared Shimano GRX option, and this is the most flexible option, but it's also the most expensive option, where you can use this with any platform that you wish. And then with these single speed and gear versions, you can choose your crank length. So that's going to be 170, 172.5, or 175. And I know that crank lengths are getting shorter these days, but at least that's more options than the Zwift Ride, which only comes with one length. However, with the Elite Square, you can actually adjust the crank length on that. And then in terms of the setup process, this is pretty straightforward. So the single speed option came in a reasonably sized box, which weighed around 40 pounds. And the top of the box actually lifts off, so you don't have to lift the frame out of the box, which is kind of a nice touch. And then it does have like one more piece of cardboard that was kind of covering it to protect it. And then from there, you just go ahead and take the frame out of the rest of the box, and the whole assembled single speed frame option weighs right around 27 pounds, which is actually quite a bit lighter than the Zwift Ride, which weighs right around 38 pounds, I believe. And then they also include a little hang tag right here on the frame with a QR code that forwards to a video to kind of guide you through the setup process. But it's a pretty straightforward process for the most part, and they actually do include all the tools that you need to get it assembled. So it's partially assembled, and all you have to do is basically install the bars, the front stabilizing feet, as well as your pedals. And I found it easiest just to mount the frame on my trainer first, which kind of stabilized the entire thing. And this mounts using a 12 by 142 millimeter through axle, which they do include. And then at that point, I just kind of kept the axle kind of loose at this point just to install the feet, so it can actually rotate the frame upwards, as some trainers don't actually pivot at the axle. And then the next step is installing the front feet, and there's basically 2 lengths here that you can choose from, and this will depend on what kind of trainer that you have. So if you have a trainer that's designed to be used with a front wheel block, like let's say an Elite trainer or a Tax trainer, you'll use the taller spacers. But if you have a trainer that doesn't require a front wheel block, like let's say a Wahoo, you'll use these shorter spacers. And you'll install the feet and spacers using these super long Allen bolts, and there is a particular direction for these feet. But after those installed, you can set the frame back on the floor, and at this point you actually can tighten down the axle. Next up are the handlebars, and again, they include all the necessary Allen wrenches to install it, and they even include this kind of inexpensive torque wrench to make sure that you get the correct amount of torque on the bolts for a safe installation. And then we'll now go ahead and get the chain lined up with the chain tensioner, and this part may differ a little bit depending on your bike trainer. And like I was mentioning, the single speed option works really well with Zwift virtual shifting, but it also works with any erg mode based platform like, let's say, Trainer Road. And either way you go, you don't necessarily need the Zwift cog with one single gear. If you already have a cassette on your trainer, just use that and go ahead and place the chain in the most appropriate cog for the best chain line. But if you do want to use it with the Zwift cog, so it's actually going to work best with the V2 version of the cog that has chain line adjustment, where you'll basically want to dial that out all the way out to the number 10 setting, or the outermost setting for the best chain line with these particular cranks. But with the original cog or even the cog 1.5, the chain line isn't as ideal due to the chain ring and the bottom bracket spacing. It still totally works, but it won't be as quiet as the V2 cog with the adjustment. And then from there, you'll need to make a few adjustments to the lower pulley just to get it kind of lined up with your cog or the chosen gear on your cassette. And then if you haven't done so already, make sure to tighten down your axle. And then moving on to fit, again, they include all the tools that you need to get this dialed in, but these are all standard Allen heads for all the bolts, and they also have markings on the stem for both reach as well as height. However, the seat post isn't marked. And they say the frame can accommodate anywhere from 4'10" all the way to 6'6", so that's a pretty broad range there. And again, maybe another reason to get an indoor bike frame where this can actually accommodate different size riders if, let's say, you have more than one person riding your household versus a used road bike where that's kind of just meant for one size rider. And it also does have a step-through component on it too, so it's easy to get on or off. And another thing to note about the Rivet here is that for the most part, these are pretty much all off-the-shelf components, basically everything but the stem, but they did want to make their own stem so there's flexibility with fit versus needing to kind of futz around with different stem lengths. But for the rest of the components, these are all standard components here, so you can swap out the seat post if you want more setback, or if you want to go super new school and get way over the cranks, and then you can even swap the cranks out if you'd like for a different length, and it even uses a standard 68mm threaded bottom bracket. And of course, you can go ahead and switch out the saddle as well as the bars, which is going to be similar to the Zwift Ride, but with the Zwift Ride, you actually can't switch out the cranks, nor can you switch out the seat post. But one more thing that you can actually switch out here are going to be the brake levers. So these come with just kind of like dummy single speed brake levers, but you can go and switch these out to anything that you like versus the Zwift Ride where you actually have to use those Zwift Ride controllers. And one quick thing to note about the saddle, by the way, and this is all personal preference, but this particular saddle fit me really, really well. Again, there's so many different kinds of saddles out there as well as all of us differ in many different ways, but just thought I'd mention that that saddle worked for me. But now let's get into app compatibility, and this is probably one of the biggest reasons that you may be looking at a Rivet, where this will work with any indoor cycling app out there depending on your setup. So with the single speed version that I have right here, like I've been mentioning, it works really well with Zwift virtual shifting. It also works with any erg mode based platform out there as well. And if you're using a Zwift, all you need to have beside the Rivet itself is your bike trainer and either a Zwift Click or their Zwift Play controllers to do the virtual shifting. But if you're going to be using this single speed version with an erg mode based platform, you don't need the Zwift Click nor do you need the Zwift Play controllers because the bike trainer is actually going to be controlling resistance. And again, you don't need the Zwift cog either, where if you already have a cassette mounted on your trainer, you can just go ahead and use that. But if you're going to be using an app that doesn't support virtual shifting, you're going to want to look at the geared option where you can physically change the gears. But the geared option they have on their website doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and it mainly comes down to the fact that I think GRX is too high end of a group to have for an indoor bike, where I would love to see something like Tiagra or maybe a lower end SRAM group. So if you do need physical gears, I'd look into the frame option and just kind of get your own parts, or you can even get the single speed option and maybe change out the rear derailleur as well as the shifter. Another important thing to note about the geared option is that it comes with a rather large 48 tooth chainring in the front, which could potentially be too large even in the easiest gear or the largest cog in the back for some of the steeper hills and gradients in some apps. Now, some apps like Zwift do have a trainer difficulty setting where you can kind of get around this, but the other side of the argument is that if you're using Zwift, just go ahead and use virtual shifting, so that's kind of a moot point, but just note that some other apps out there don't have trainer difficulty. But when it comes to the actual ride feel and the ride experience of using the Rivet, well, quite frankly, I've really enjoyed it. And again, I've been putting in some really long rides in this thing. It's incredibly stable with the two front feet, and I also do like the fact that the handlebars actually don't move from side to side like a real bike. And I just kind of like that level of stability where my bars don't turn, and to be honest with you, I'm a little bit OCD as well, so it bothers me a lot even if my bars are just a little bit off. But the stability aspect is kind of interesting here versus the Zwift Ride. So with the Zwift Ride, it's not like it's unstable or anything being just one leg. There's definitely no issues with stability on that. But where things kind of get interesting is if you're going to be using a trainer that actually has some side-to-side movement, where with the Zwift Ride, you actually potentially feel a little bit of movement since it only has that one leg in the front, where with this, you don't really experience that side-to-side movement. But on the flip side though, the one thing the Zwift Ride can't do, which is a big highlight of the Rivet, is that this is actually compatible with the Wahoo Kicker Climb as well as the Elite Riser. Another thing that they actually changed here though is the stem, where if you watch my original video, you may have noticed a little bit of flex coming from the stem, but they noticed that, I noticed that, and you all noticed that, and they did actually beef this up quite a bit, and there's basically like little to no play here at all. All right, so this is a little sound check of the Caveworks Rivet with the Zwift Cog V2. Yeah. So it's pretty similar to the Zwift Ride, but I feel like the Zwift Ride has a little bit of resonance that comes from the little like chain tensioner that it has, where this, it's similar, but I feel like it's just a little bit more quiet. So I think it's pretty much just going to be like any other smart bike trainer out there with like a standard cassette. I think it's kind of like splitting differences a little bit. But again, for the quietest setup, if you are using the Zwift Cog, you'll want the Zwift Cog 2.0 with the chainline adjustment, or just go to, again, use your cassette and place it in the most ideal cog. And then in terms of rust and corrosion, so this process actually has changed from this particular frame that I've been riding versus what's shipping right now to customers. So I experienced a little bit of rust right here inside the seat tube, but actually quite a bit of rust inside the head tube right here. But they have changed this process to apply frame saver inside the tubes before they ship out, which prevents the rust. But what I just did, since it didn't have the frame saver on this particular frame, is I just went and cleaned it out and then applied some grease. However, for the rest of the hardware, that's all held up perfectly well, where I don't see rust on anything like that on all the bolts or even the proprietary stem. So all that stuff looks good to go. So with that, is the Rivet right for you? Well, it kind of depends, but it has worked well for me with Zwift as well as Trainer Road. And basically my particular setup is that I basically just have like a little Zwift click up here and I'm good to go. I actually really like these levers quite a bit, and I know I could add these Zwift Play controllers for a few more controls like you can have on the Zwift Ride, but this clean setup works really, really well. I do like the additional controls that you have with these Zwift Ride controllers, but one thing I was kind of thinking about is that if something goes wrong with those controllers, you have to replace those entire things, where this is a lot more modular. But that kind of gets us to probably one of the bigger strengths of the Rivet, is that these are pretty much all off-the-shelf components, like the bottom bracket, the cranks, the seat post, as well as the handlebars. The stem is proprietary, of course, but that does allow for that easy adjustment. With the Zwift Ride, that definitely is cheaper than the Rivet, but those are also all proprietary components. So if anything were to go wrong, you have to go through Zwift. And again, you actually can't choose your crank length right now through Zwift. But that kind of gets us into why you may want a dedicated indoor bike frame versus something like a used road bike, which definitely can be cheaper than all those options. And it really comes down to customizability, where you can basically customize this to like any size rider. So if you have more than one person riding in your household, that can really make a big difference here. And with a used road bike, if you're searching for something like that, you may be on the search for a while to get that just right fit. Anyhow, that's the Caveworks Rivet. And if you have any questions about it that I didn't cover in this video, feel free to drop those down in the comment section down below. And if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and also hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos just like this that are coming soon. In the meantime, happy riding, and we will see you in the next video.